This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
All right, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. This is going to be a fun one. It took me a while to figure out if I wanted to do this or not, but this is the best, crappiest collector cars. I'm hoping this is one of many different editions. And for the very first inaugural edition, I have Josh Stiegman. Josh, how you doing today, buddy?
Greg, how are you, man? Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. We've met a couple years ago now, I guess. And you're a previous guest. You were on Guess the Hammer, our live streaming event. Added a lot of value to that with your knowledge of cars. So tell us a little bit about your knowledge of cars. What do you do and how come you know stuff about cars?
Yeah, well, I work for a company in Indianapolis called MotorVault. We're a collector car dealership with a focus on consignment. You know, we do everything from supercars to muscle cars to 80s enthusiast cars, a little bit of everything in between. And we're a backdraft racing dealer, which they make, you know, recreation Cobras. But it's a small team. We've been around for 3 years. I've been there for 2 years, and I've been a car guy my whole life. Grew up here in Indianapolis, racing capital of the world. So got started with IndyCar, started with Hot Wheels cars, and I just knew from day one I was going to be doing car stuff. And I've had a very, very cool growing up with having some cool experiences working for Motor Speedway Museum and working for a friend of ours, Mark Hyman, out in St. Louis for a couple summers. And Ken Lingenfelter up in Michigan, and was able to land this really, really cool position being pretty much a sales manager and car specialist at MotorVault here in Indianapolis.
Actually, that just triggered. I know where we met. We met in front of Lingenfelter's 1967 Cadillac at Auburn.
Yes.
That my client ended up buying. You were making it look perfect before it went across the block, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was the black Eldorado. Yes.
Still has it. So
awesome.
Yeah, that was a really cool car. So that's where we met. And then shortly after that, you moved to Indy, right?
Yes. And then that's when we reconnected at the Alt Park Concours.
That's right.
That's how you got me out to Monterey for the first time. That's where that all kicked off.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, thanks for being again on the podcast. Now, you texted me your list. And just for a little bit of background, I came up with this idea, believe it or not, thinking about Mercedes 300 SLs. Not that they're crappy cars, but if you ask an owner who has the Gullwing and who has the Roadster, no one wants to drive the Gullwing, you know, because it overheats. It's so hot. It's just stifling visibility. You know, yes, it's got the incredibly cool Gullwing doors. I would want a Gullwing, but every single one of them always says, well, the Roadster is a much better car. And yet, because of the iconic Gullwing and the racing history and, you know, all the stuff I can go into about Gullwings,
right?
They're $2 million cars nowadays. You know, they're $1 million forever. Now they're creeping up, and they've been creeping up consistently. So you're lucky to get one at 1.5 nowadays. So that was kind of what made me think about this. And as I do some of my email blasts, I'm like, oh, I love to have an 83 Isuzu iMark diesel. Well, that's just a crappy car. I mean, it's not a collector car. That's just a crappy car. So I started thinking, you know what? There are some collector cars out there that are actually pretty crappy. Yes. As you know, but they're still collectible for one reason or another. So why don't we go down your list? Do you want me to read them off, or you want to just go based on what you remember?
We'll start right into it, and we'll jump into another Gullwing icon.
Yes.
Back to the Future DeLorean, one of the coolest looking cars of all time. But what an absolute turd of a car. There's lower than Get Out, you know, 130 horsepower on a good day. Because they're a French drivetrain, aren't they, right?
Yeah, it's like a French drivetrain, Renault straight 5 in the back. You know, it's a quasi, never made it to fruition, never fulfilled DeLorean's vision. There's a famous story about, I guess, Johnny Carson of The Tonight Show got stuck in it once because the Gullwing doors wouldn't open. Yeah, I agree with you. Iconic, great collector cars. You know, they have been appreciating lately, especially as that generation gets older and can afford to buy those cars. But I would agree with you. That is a crappy collector car.
Because if you think about it, you really don't see many of them on the road, even at shows. It's very, very uncommon when you see one actually driven. Most of the times you see them, they're in a museum, they're at a higher level show, and they are being displayed, not really being driven there.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point. I've never seen one on the road, like you said. I do think the three most collectible DeLoreans outside of the movie cars would be, I believe they made 3 gold-plated cars at the last 3, something to that effect. Also, when I was researching cars that are MIA, $1 million plus cars that are MIA, I found a DeLorean. I didn't find it, but I discovered a DeLorean that is missing in action from Back to the Future.
Really?
And I would love to do a podcast episode trying to track this thing down. It was in the Planet Hollywood in Honolulu, I believe, in Hawaii. And when they liquidated and the company went out of business, it was sold at an auction. All the equipment, everything was liquidated. It was from the movie, but it was a shell of a DeLorean, so not one of the more expensive ones that are worth more today. But as far as I can tell, nobody knows where that car is. So if you know where the Honolulu DeLorean Back to the Future shell is, please let me know. So
maybe it found itself a Corvette chassis, hit 88 miles an hour, and just vanished back to 55.
That's what it would take. Yeah. Just not a Corvette from that generation. We could go down a whole C3 crappy car conversation here, but we won't. All right. So your next car on your list is one that you had as a daily driver there when I met you in Indy one time, right?
Yes, the Pontiac Fiero, a car that GM gave up on way too early because I was spoiled with a really good one. I was spoiled with a gold on gold 87 GT with the honeycombs that was 2 owners, 57,000 miles, it was loaded up. It's a really, really pretty car, GT being the V6. They really didn't get that car nailed down until the last about 3 years, from 86 until 88. 88, they really redid a lot of stuff. They redid the suspension, where it was its own unique suspension for that car. And the reason why they, I think, part killed that car off is that the new redesigned GT from 88 was so quick on the road courses, since the suspension was all new and not Chevette, that it was actually outrunning the C4 Corvette on road courses. It was significantly faster. So they're like, we don't want a little 6-cylinder Pontiac knocking down our flagship. But the main issue is when they built that car initially in 1984, is they pumped out way too many, way too quick, and they didn't have everything buttoned up. They had the fuel line issues. The car started bursting into flames.
Right.
Woefully underpowered. They had build quality issues, and just they were really known as a poor man's sports car that really wasn't kind of completed. And it really tarnished what that car was. And unfortunately, it wasn't until the very end when Pontiac finally got it right. It was a great car in 88, and then they shot it dead.
Yeah.
Because he's been doing GM things.
Yeah, that's the road test we need to do. 88 C4 Corvette versus a Pontiac Fiero GT. That would be a fun comparison right there.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And those have been appreciating, as you know, recently. Now, was that one sold through your day job?
Yeah, because it was technically a company car for 3-4 months, which is awesome. I love that car. It was just so shocking how well the car handled and felt for an 80s General Motors product. It was absolutely shocking. So we did get a good chunk of coin for it, for sure. But again, it was a really nice example. It's got to be a GT or a Formula or lower mile pace car, but there are plenty of Fieros that are basket cases. Right. That's the other thing. There are a lot of them out there, but a lot of them aren't running. They're sitting in backyards. There's normally 3 of them per backyard because they're all parts cars for each other.
Yeah.
So it's, again, cars like that. It's finding the really minty, nice ones with all the right options. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's not good if you have 3 Fieros and you can't remember which one was the parts car.
No. Oh boy. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. All right. Well, your next one's a big car. It's a big collector car. I mean, it's $500,000. So why do you say the Jaguar XJ220 is a piece of crap?
Well, I've ridden in one briefly. It was violently noisy, violently rough. So you got that part for one. But again, it was not intended for comfort. But those cars are one of the most finicky to work on, one of the most impossible hard cars to work on, find parts for. Because they used it was the Rover V6 rally engine is what they basically used in those. And up until about 10 years ago, there was only one shop in the entire United States that was certified by Jaguar to work on those cars. And it was in Muncie, Indiana, of all places.
Yeah. Yeah.
Muncie Imports and Classics. So it's just like, if there's one place in the country to work on them, and anytime you work on them, it's what, $50,000, $100,000, just for routine maintenance. I mean, it's just, it doesn't really make sense to drive them ever.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because they were a marvel when they came out. It's the fastest car in the world, looked awesome, sounded great, but when the car's a ticking time bomb every time you move it, it's just it's not good.
Yeah, I think now I might be wrong on this, but I thought it was actually faster, at least in top speed, than the F40 and the 959 Porsche.
Correct.
And it was interesting is, when Jaguars first came out with the XK nomenclature was the XK 120, then it went 120 miles an hour, the 140, 150. This one's 220, so you would think it went 220 miles an hour. Turns out it topped out at 217. So it should be called the XJ 217. 320 sounds better, but that was probably when they had the V12 versus having to settle for the 6. Interesting thing we're seeing in the auction world, though, is there's a lot of F40s. There's, comparatively speaking, out there, as well as 959s. And so when someone wants something unique and different from that era that's a supercar, that's where they go after the XJ220, because you just never see them, or rarely. And they're very good looking. They've aged very well.
Stunning.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. This next one honestly did surprise me. This is after, I guess, I don't want to say my generation, but they were around, a WRX STI. So why is that a crappy car? Because they've been going through the roof. I understand some issues with some of the generations, like their engine block or something, but tell me why, in your mind, is the Subaru WRX STI one of the best crappy collector cars?
Well, first off, they have a huge cult following, which is awesome. They obviously are a very unique part of the collector car world, given that they can be daily drivers basically anywhere in the world, since they're basically all-wheel drive, rally bred, rally history, very simple car in, most standpoints. But again, when you put those turbochargers on those cars, there are a handful of them that have a serious issue of, for one, detonating the engines and having head gasket issues and just leaking oil, burning oil like crazy. And the other part of the problem is that there's a lot of them that get really, really heavily abused because there's there's so many people that can afford them because they're cheaper. So a lot of people will treat them like a cheaper car, even though they are a specialty car that should be run on premium gas, should be taken care of as a sports car. But they're getting treated kind of like almost like a V6 Charger in a way, which,
right,
that's where that falls into. But it's there's a lot of them out there, but they have some known mechanical issues and they just don't get treated right. And then they don't get fixed right. And then the other thing is they get modified heavily, many of them.
Yeah.
And when you really start putting more boost on those stock engines is really when they have issues. So if you don't build the engines on those cars to compensate for the boost on them, then you're just going to get detonated blocks everywhere. So awesome car, great cult classic. Actually, multiple of my personal friends, at least 3 of them, own WRXs or WRX STIs, and they're really cool. But yeah, they are a unique bit, and also obviously rust issues is another thing too, because cheap Japanese metal from that standpoint too. So they fall in a unique category.
Well, you gave me quite a list of reasons that's a crappy car. Okay. Yeah. No, I get it. And I know the best thing there is to do, get the pre-purchase inspection if you are going to buy one. And obviously the best of the best, I think, would be the B22s, which only, there's not that many of those. So
yeah, but they only made what, a couple 122Bs, and again, you can't touch one of those for under 150,000 with one with a replacement engine and low and high miles.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
the really nice ones go for well over 200,000. There's a couple that sold for over 300,000.
Yeah, just nuts. Yep. All right, we got two more here. Well, kind of two more. So the next one, I do agree with you. First gen Viper. I actually saw one of those the other day. Gorgeous, raw, kind of crazy. This one had the the inserts, the window inserts, no door handle, no, all that kind of stuff. So tell me, why is this one on your list?
Well, it's a very cool car, very fast. Obviously, Carroll Shelby's involvement makes that very special. But to put it in simple terms, it is a fatter Shelby Cobra with early 1990s Chrysler build quality.
Yes.
It is the epitome of plastic, crappy, not good finish, cheap everything. It's just the build quality on those cars are awful. Obviously, it's a V10, so it's going to be interesting with maintenance, but again, if you do your routine maintenance, you replace all your seals, you do everything you're supposed to, they'll be fine. It's going to be almost like servicing a cheaper Lamborghini Diablo. It's easier to find parts, going to be easier to maintain, but the build quality on those cars are so violently bad. There's really nothing to compare from that, because they just rattle, bang, clank. There is very, very little that makes you feel even remotely comfortable in those. I think you'll have more comforts and better build quality in an original 60s Cobra.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I actually ran across one. I'll throw a picture up here in a kind of in a barn, but more in a warehouse the other day. And I fell in love with it. I just thought it was so cool. If you're I actually really like the 96 GTS, the blue with the white stripes,
Yes.
and the chrome wheels, your traditional package. That's the one I want. But I really appreciate
technically a Gen 2, correct?
Yeah, Gen 2.
Because they upgraded it a lot by then.
Right. Right. And so this was a Gen 1 with the window inserts, no handle. What was interesting, though, when I asked about the history of the car, apparently, they're just a handful, and so this car twice was slightly wrecked to where it just spun out of control with two different people. And the second time was serious enough, they had to put a rear clip on the car. And the interesting fact is apparently the first handful, I don't know how many, but the first handful of Vipers that came out of the factory, I guess that would be 94.
92 was the first Viper.
92. Anyways, I don't know where the break off is, but the battery originally was behind the driver's rear wheel. And yeah, and then they changed it to inside the trunk. And so this was one of the rare rear wheel battery locations. But when they had the clip replaced, they put the trunk mounted one in, which easier for maintenance and stuff, but it kind of kills the originality of the car. Right. Especially if that's a rare aspect of the car, is having the battery in that certain spot. So, and to change it back would be a big old headache. So, if you hear I got a Viper recently, it means I got a good deal. So,
rock on.
All right. The next one kind of falls into that Viper for different reasons bucket. But now you changed this on me. When we talked about it via text, you said this is very controversial here, any 1960s muscle car, but you changed it to what? Most 1960s muscle cars?
Yes. And it's mainly from the standpoint of they're awesome to look at. They sound great. They're icons. They're a part of true Americana. But almost, not all, but most American muscle cars cannot handle or brake worth anything. They are absolutely just wallow over the road. Steering feedback is terrible. They are not necessarily the best driving things out there. And the car that kind of made me change that a little bit is that, so you obviously got your big fat American muscle cars. You got your, your Chevelles, you got your Buick Grand Sports, your Oldsmobile 442s. those cars are boats. Those cars, no matter what, won't handle great at all. But when you get to the level of like the pony cars, which would include the Mustang, some of those earlier Mustangs, especially with, suspension upgrade, actually do handle pretty decently. So you can't really knock those for that. Like, for example, I know you just came across a Mustang, which is now in your stable. And especially if it had the Shelby equipment on it, it was not a bad handling car comparatively to other American cars of that time frame. I mean, obviously the Corvette's in its own ballpark, is built to be a sports car.
Right.
But the muscle cars were not intended to be taking corners quickly. And that really, really hurt, because when you have a 400 horsepower car and you need to at some point slow down and corner, thing feels like it's going to tip over and it's just too real. That's terrifying.
And I would actually agree with you, like a base Mustang, like I got a nice little hypo K-code. I found it under a tarp. I'll do a little video about it. That one did have upgraded suspension, Shelby brakes, disc brakes, stuff that you'd want so it can go around curves and such, like you said. But like the base Mustang, which I absolutely love, just the build quality on the car, they're just mass market. They're just making those as quickly as they can. You shut the door, it just sounds horrible when you shut that door. And I even have I compared it to I think it was a 68 442. That door slams so much better just from a quality build versus the Ford Mustang. And I'm a Mustang fan, and like and everything. Like I just got rid of my 99 911. That 911, granted, 30 years later, 20 years later, but just seeing that build quality is so tight. So everything else, it's really interesting. But like, to your point, I agree with you. A lot of the muscle cars from the 60s and early 70s cannot handle. The exceptions would be like the CUDA AAR, that's made for racing, the Boss 302s that's made for racing, the Z28s, but those are few and far between. So I would
that's why I changed it, because there is a specific group of those cars that were individually produced with a little extra mustard to really help those cars. But man, the majority of those, I mean, if they don't have modern disc brakes on them, and if they don't have, modern suspension on them, they're kosher as is. I definitely get a little bit timid driving them. I still enjoy it, but I don't enjoy them the same way that I would if a car had been in period, upgraded with all the factory bits, or like what a lot of people are doing today, like resto modding. There's a reason for it. As much as I love being a purist about stuff, I love a true original numbers matching, everything is correct car. But if you're going to go out and drive something and enjoy it and planning on driving it a lot, put new disc brakes on it, put a new 5-speed transmission in it. If the motor's not great, put a new fuel injected engine in it. It's going to feel similar, but better, a lot safer, and you still have the exact same look. So I fully understand why people do that. It's something I personally will do when I end up buying something of that nature, because I would love a 67 Mustang Fastback with a Coyote and a 5-speed. I mean, that would be awesome. But that's, I guess, a topic for another podcast, is the resto mods and when to and when not to modify.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a whole coming quickly already out there, resto mod aftermarket of, resale. So these cars selling for, at the time, a low price was $250. Now, 300 seems to be a low price, and up to 600 grand now. And that's for the first time they've been out, brand new. 3 years later, when they've been driven some, I'm curious to see how that resale value happens on those cars. And it's already starting to happen.
Right.
And that goes, that will play towards, the quality, the name of the builder, quality of the parts, that kind of stuff. So thanks for being on our first episode of the Best Crappiest. One, I do want to give an honorable mention, because I can't probably mention our first episode of this without mentioning the Lamborghini Countach. What is your thought on the Countach? Is that one of the best, crappiest collector cars ever?
Yes, because it's one of the most iconic design cars of all time. It is probably the single most posterized car of all time. even with people like I'm 26, even people my age, it doesn't matter what, it's a Lamborghini, even if you're not a car person. So from that standpoint, they're awesome. But from what I've heard, I've never been in one yet. I hope to change that at some point. I heard they drive like a truck. They drive terrible. They have zero visibility. And the experience behind the wheel is actually a letdown comparative to, say, for instance, an F40, to a Testarossa, to a Lotus Esprit, whatever you may have. So I would agree with that for sure from the driving standpoint of it. Obviously, the looks and the iconic part of that car will keep it right at that flirtation point of, is it crappy or is it not? It'll always be a debate on that one.
Yeah, I was in a collection out in Illinois, middle of nowhere, in corn country, and the guy had a Countach, and he insisted that I sit in it, which was cool. Really, really hard to get into, really hard to get out of. And he's like, "This car drives like a grain truck." In the same sentence, he said, "But I'll never sell it." It's that the poster car. He also has a Diablo, and he said the difference between those two cars, even though structurally there's a lot of similarities, but all the stuff that they fixed between those two cars is unbelievable. He said the Diablo is so much more of a joy to drive, much more of an everyday car versus a Countach, which he said is basically horrible, but he'll never get rid of it.
Oh yeah, put in the main staple of a collection, put those doors up. Yeah. Everybody will go to that car, take photos, the whole 10 yards. That car will have that as long as cars are on a road, and even past that. That car will always be an icon, no matter what happens.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being on the podcast. Tell our listeners the best way to find you. Do you have an IG handle? Where do you work? What's the website?
Yes. Yeah, so it's our website for our dealership is www.motorvault.com. We are on Instagram as Indie MotorVault, and then we are just MotorVault on Facebook. We're growing our YouTube page a little bit. We're starting to do kind of a little bit more of something really fun, which obviously from you knowing me a little bit, I love going to auctions. I love being in the depths of everything. And we just started recently going to auctions, taking my video guy with us, and really kind of getting the backstage access of what it feels like to be there, watching the cars go across, getting some commentary, looking at all the cars coming through the stage in lines. And we did that at Worldwide Auctioneers, Auburn, for our first one. It was fun. So this we got Meek and Mindy coming up here, which whenever this will be posted will be obviously in the future, but Meek and Mindy will be another one, and hoping to do more of those, of really kind of taking in what the collector car auction side of the car scene really is all about. So we're growing, we're having fun, and we're enthusiasts first things first. So that's what it's all about.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, Greg, you bet, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.